You got it.
I'd like to call this meeting of the Human Resources Committee to order. It's Monday, August 28th. It's 7:15. We're in Nashua High School North Boardroom, and Mrs. Hohensee is going to call the roll.
Mrs. Ziem?
Yes.
Mrs. Oden is absent. Dr. Murataki?
Here.
Mrs. Hohensee is here. Also in attendance is Mr. Kaufman, Ms. Van Twyver, Mr. Farrington, Mr. Hallowell, Dr. Mosley, Mrs. O'Gara, Dr. McKinney, and Mrs. Fitzpatrick.
We have a quorum. Tonight, we are here for the purpose of interviewing two candidates for the principalship at Nashua High School North. Our first, and I would like to thank our first candidate, Andrew Haas. This is, I think, your third or fourth trip, and we appreciate your visiting us all these many times, and welcome. And would you like to introduce yourself and share a little bit about yourself with the TVIN folks?
Sure. Is there I don't know which way to face. Or
Well, you don't
yeah.
have to.
Okay.
The camera's in back.
Okay.
And he'll get you.
I can look at anybody. Okay, I apologize. So my name is Andrew Haas. I'm currently the principal of Ellis School in Fremont, New Hampshire. Ellis is a pre-K through 8th grade. I was, go back many years ago, I worked in Nashua as a headmaster. I started at the senior high school when it was the one, went through the transition and stayed at the South School while we transitioned over. I've always held Nashua near and dear to me a little bit because this is where I got my administrative start. It's also where I got back into public school because I had moved out to New England, actually to work at Cushing Academy, which is a prep school in upstate Massachusetts, and had an opportunity to come here and talk, and I was talking with actually Jen Susing, who convinced me that I should come back to public school. And so in a whole circular way, that's how I kind of found myself coming back here and to look into this. I've been in education for almost 25 years, most of it at the high school. I was looking to make a change, and also looking just to see what it would be like to go down to elementary school, and which is the reason why I made that switch. And having the opportunity and seeing that this was open was an opportunity I just felt like I needed to, try and get into it and see if I can make a change.
Thank you. And that having been said, are there any questions from the board members? Any of the Miss Van Twyver?
Thank you. You have worked in Massachusetts and Vermont and New Hampshire, and I find that very interesting. What are some of the good things that you can pull from each of those state education groups to help us in our district?
That's great. So, and I'll also add in, I've worked in California, but I know that, to draw from that to over here is but a lot of times, when I was in New Hampshire, before I went down to Massachusetts, we were just beginning that whole process on competencies at the high school level. And so when I was at Conant High School, we spent a lot of time really working through that painful part that a lot of schools either they started on that path or they kind of just said, we're going to call this competency and move on. We were really getting into it. When I went to Massachusetts was very much the Carnegie unit, right? So seat time was most important. And working through that system, coming from a system that's talking about competencies, and now you're going kind of backwards, it felt like, really working within that system to say, how can you kind of marry the two together is the best way I can put that. Because especially when I opened up the alternative high school, we were looking at reasons why kids weren't being successful, and we needed to change and come up with different ways. And so working through that system, working with their Department of Education was a real interesting factor. One of the other things I think that Massachusetts does very well is they use school committees at the building level. And so you have a building level committee of not only teachers, but also with community members and other stakeholders, and that helps drive what you're doing in the building, and that give and take. When I got the opportunity to go to Vermont began pushing proficiencies, just another word for competencies. And I went through that painful process. And I say painful because you really have to have conversations to really understand if you're doing it correctly. Teachers have got to have that conversation about what is a competency and what does it look like. And so we began that process of working through that and began piloting just the year before I left. We began piloting proficiencies in a few of our classrooms so that we could understand that piece and move forward. What's interesting also is the special ed laws are very different from each state. So often in Vermont, we would have kids, families that would jump the river for one reason or another. And what constituted a student's eligibility in New Hampshire didn't necessarily always constitute an eligibility in Vermont. And so working with parents to try and understand that piece, because just because a student is eligible in New Hampshire but not eligible in Vermont or vice versa, doesn't mean the student doesn't have that disability. It just means that how they're interpreting the law is different. So I found that having worked in those 3 states, it's interesting how they're very similar, but they have very differences, and they're nuanced differences.
Other questions? The first time I saw 3 or 4, and now all of a sudden, Mr. Kaufman, thank you.
I'd like to distribute this to the board. And Mr. Haas,
I would prefer, just for the sake of protocols, I believe that if there's the matter that we discussed, I think it might be more appropriate for us to perhaps go into non-public.
If
on that
that's what you would like to do, I think
would
it's something
prefer
that
to do
was
that.
revealed in public, and therefore I believe it is public. But if you want to go into non-public,
do.
that's fine.
I do.
Yes, so others, please.
Go into non-public. Oh, I guess I
Well,
can't
shall
'cause
we
it's
finish,
HR.
why
Nope,
don't
sorry,
we
it's
finish
HR.
the other, should we just go ahead and finish all of the public portion so that our guests won't be, no, I'm not asking you to leave, I'm saying please stay. And we'll do all the public, and then we'll do the non-public after you've left, and that way you can take a coffee break or whatever, okay? So do you have questions?
Sure,
Go for it.
great. So what do you see, I suspect you've done a little research as to what's going on here in the school district, and in particular at North. What do you see as the most pressing challenges here in this school? And how would you address them?
So there's a couple of different complexities, and I've learned a lot going through this process also. And with, what I see as a huge piece is what, is happening with climate and culture. When this building opened, it was, people were excited about it and being here. And what seems to be, and it's just my perception, is it's been fragmented and people are not feeling as cohesive as they used to. I think that then has a trickle-down effect for how that affects what happens in the classroom with instruction, but also with student behavior. And then that trickles into what we see in test scores. And that's ultimately what we get looked upon as, where are your test scores? And so I truly believe that if you tackle the climate piece of a building and really look at how can you address that, how can you increase that piece, how can you make teachers feel like they're a part of a system, then they can begin to transfer that to their students and make that relevant switch. So that to me is like the biggest piece that I've really looked at. So.
But can you give me, if I could just follow up, can you give me some ideas as to how you might approach a school? I mean, this is a pretty good-sized school. If the teaching community is divided, how do you go about starting to bring them back together and mend those divides, if you will?
So I think from the get-go, it's spending a lot of time observing, but also listening to people and allowing people to come in and talk with you and have that open conversation. Because I think a lot of times teachers feel like if they come in and have that conversation, it's kind of a gotcha moment, if you will. And so it's letting them speak their mind and at the same time, supporting them in some of their endeavors. In every building, there's always staff issues, and how do you work through those staff issues and bringing those two staff members together to have those conversations? Because they have to coexist in some way. So I think it's important that you would bring that. But I really believe that it's opening a door. So at Ellis, when I took over at Ellis had that same kind of fragmenting that was going on. And teachers very much came into the building, they taught, they didn't talk to each other. And they didn't feel they were supported, they didn't feel they were valued in any way. And so we spent a lot of time just talking with teachers, put together a leadership team of representative of teachers, let them start making decisions, and hearing where they wanted to go as far as support and whatnot, and really get them involved, because our changes that are happening at Ellis that kicked off this year, I can't tell you. I've started school, like I say, almost 25 years. We started school today. Was one of the smoothest starts we've ever had, because the teachers were very vested. It wasn't from me. It wasn't about me. It was about the teachers being invested, making it work for the students, and the feedback we've gotten from students, even today, but from the teachers, is that it was a real smooth start. And so it's really valuing teachers and letting them have that voice. As this has become public and they found out that I'm interviewing here, I've taken some heat, and I have to let them have that heat. I mean, I've been yelled at. I've been, closed doors with some good discussions, and I think that they have to have that voice, but they feel that they can have that voice now, and that it's going to be collegial, and it's not necessarily an inappropriate conversation. So,
Can I follow just
Yes.
one more? In that same vein, on the other side with the students, we hear stories about, we have a very diverse student population in both of our high schools, and division amongst the students. How do you bring them together and make them a more cohesive group?
yeah, and in a large building like this, it's really important. And really, it's not even this building, because the two schools share so much. It's working with the South School to make sure you're sending the same message. You can't send two different messages. But I really think it's about getting together. One of the things we did at Brattleboro was we had student focus groups. And so we met with kids, a group of kids, at different times. So if we were having an issue with diversity or with another hot topic, we would pull kids and try to meet with those kids and get an understanding of what's the underlying current. And not necessarily always go pick your top students. Because picking your top students, you're only going to, it's like having parents who show up for these things, right? You get the parents, not always that you need at your meetings. And with students, if I always go get my honors and my AP students, I'm not getting a true understanding of what's going on in that building. So I have to meet with multiple different kids and have those focus meetings. It's also having an open door policy with your kids and letting them come in and have those conversations. One of the things I started doing at Brattleboro, it was because I had a knee surgery and the doctor said, get up and walk, was I started handing out birthday cards to kids. And I would handwrite a birthday card to a kid, and I'd walk around, and I got to meet kids I've never met, because they're never kids who show up in the office, right? And so walking into a classroom and calling out some kid's name and not know who it is, but it's a chance for me to now make a connection with that student, is a valuable opportunity. And I see that as just money. And so, and then when you come back the next year and you're given that same card, kids now expect it. It's amazing to see how kids expect that all of a sudden. So that's a lot of the ways that we found that we brought kids together. We did other things. We did like a lip dub, which is like a music video throughout your whole building. And the camera walks through the whole building, and then all the different various stakeholders and clubs and everything have a part in it. And it takes months of planning, and kids planned it with advisors. And from an administrative point of view, it was like crazy, right? Because you're giving all this freedom, but the kids really rose to that occasion. And I find that when you challenge kids and give them expectations, that they can meet those challenges.
Thank you.
Did I say somebody, Dr. Moritaki?
Yes, thank you. I've got a couple questions. The first actually is, it deals with the diversity of your competencies and proficiencies experience. So I'm an Army vet, and one of the things that we did in the United States Army, actually it was also done in the Navy and the Air Force, was that in the early to mid 1970s, we began to transition the training of our soldiers and our airmen and our sailors to a competency-based system. This was true in electronics, it was true in engines maintenance, it was true in nuclear power, and a variety of the MOSs, the military occupational specialties. So the way it went is like this. An MOS proficiency is not just about can you fix a General Electric J79 engine, block 30, and take it from a certain state of disrepair to a point where you can actually run the engine. It's a lot more than that. The soldier or the sailor or the airman has to actually understand the basic theory behind what makes engines go, or nuclear power plants go, or what makes weather, or, I think you get the idea. Mm-hmm. So this went on for decades, and it wasn't until the late 1990s that I began to notice the education community picking up on an idea of competencies. But for some strange reason, they seem to forget the model that the military had been using since the 1970s and 80s. It was kind of similar, but there was a lot of feeling that the kind of competencies, training, and assessment that the military used to do, which I thought was really fabulous, was not applicable to the secondary education model. And I kept on scratching my head and I'm saying, I don't understand why this belief is out there. Because if you can train a nuclear power technician or an engine maintenance technician or a meteorologist on how to do things by competencies, why can't we do the same thing in high school? And so I kept on scratching my head and I kept on asking the questions. It seems to me that you might actually have a better insight into this because you've seen it from different points of view. So could you maybe reflect on what I just said, and what do you think we can do in terms of how we do competencies for secondary education here in Nashua, specifically at North? Any ideas?
So first, I'm not familiar with the military's approach that they took. And I think hearing just what you're saying, it would be important to understand that, because when you say it's not applicable or wasn't allowed to be applicable, it's something that in my research, it hasn't come up, and they have not found that way to connect those two. But I think with competencies, one of the biggest things, as we rolled them out in Brattleboro, one of our administrators kept showing, there'd be an MIT professor who's, likes skateboarding, and he would, they'd show the video of skateboarding, and he'd say, this is a molly or whatever, and if I didn't land it, is that an A, is that a B, a C? And it left a lot of teachers saying, well, what is that, how is that connected to education? And because it's, I think, easy to explain competencies a lot of time when you're looking at something that you're interested in, right? So if I want to be a mechanic and understand how to repair an engine and everything, because that's my MOS, right? I'm interested in it because it's my career choice, and if I want to succeed in the military, I'm going to be vested in it. A lot of times I think what happens when it's applied to education is, and it's a big shocker for all of us, kids really don't like to come to school and learn in the books. There are kids who do, but like not every kid is so excited about coming to math class or going to science class or going to history class. And so what happens is they don't see how that applies to them, and they don't see how they're vested in it. And so one of the big things that I think is really important and that any school can do that's moving towards competencies is find the way to make those personal connections and make it personally relevant to students. Back when I was in Nashua and we started on the Daggett model, I don't know if you guys remember the Daggett model? And so we were bringing in Bill Daggett, and he had the 4 quadrants with Bloom's taxonomy and you know, moving towards relevancy and acquisition of knowledge. We were moving in that direction, and then as we started building in the academy model, and the whole idea was that kids were going to choose a major and they'd be vested in it and they'd want to do it. And that was the right thinking, I believe, but I don't know, because I left, so I don't know where that didn't continue on. If I'm understanding your question, that it hasn't continued on, I'm making that assumption. But I think that, you know, by finding ways to make things personally relevant for kids, that they understand why they're doing something. So at Ellis, we don't talk about the teacher saying, "Did you do my homework?" It's the homework is the student's homework. And if you don't want to do the homework type of thing, well, it's your learning, and the homework's still there. When do you want to get around to doing it? And that's a shift. But we've got to work on getting kids to fully understand why they're in school, what the purpose of it, what the outcome is going to be, and find ways to connect what they're doing every day in that. And I think that's where, you know, I'm an English literature major. You know, I love Shakespeare, I love Mark Twain, but it's not relevant to every single student that's going to go through. So how do we find a piece of literature to connect with that student so that they can feel a part of it, and so they can feel successful, because that mastery piece is really, really important. I think the other piece is we're on that industrial model of school. We start school in September or August, and we go through till June, and kids go from grade 1 to grade 2 to grade 3, and you know, the bell rings and that gets us all to move. We're on an assembly line. And so why doesn't it always apply to school is because we're trying to take a system that moves at the student's pace and apply it to something that has that says, no, you move at our pace. And so as a parent, and I have a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, and my 14-year-old just started high school, and it really worries me, like, you know, is he going to be able to get into college? And as you move on competencies, and, you know, he's so used to this system. And so we've got to find a way to really have those conversations and show parents, and start small, because when you try to do something really big, it doesn't work. You got to start small and start applying it. And I mean, that's been my seeing of success, as opposed to just saying, we're going to go competencies, which is what we did 10 years ago, and or a little bit more than that when I was at Conant High School, and it just didn't happen because people were not willing to, you know, to buy into it.
Thank you very much. I think that was a good answer. May I have follow-up?
Yes.
So now we get to my second question, and it's a simple one. Why did you want to come here and take over the principalship of North?
So as I explained at the beginning, I mean, there is this piece of me that has always looked at Nashua and held Nashua dear as a district. But I think that, you know, it wasn't on my radar, and that was the scariest thing for me, was to, you know, I am enjoying where I am and looking at it, and to take on something that, you know, it's a big school, it's a big district, but to come in and to be able to work with folks and to affect change is something that that's what drives me. And having an opportunity to come into a district that is looking for some change and looking to bring some cohesion is something that's important to me. I passed up opportunities that were close to home. So to me, it wasn't necessarily about just being close to home and let me pick the school close to home. It's about the fit. And so having some prior knowledge of Nashua helped me know what I was walking into to some degree. But also being able to come into a place where I feel that I fit in and can help make those changes was important.
Thank you very much.
I think, Mr. Kaufman?
Hi. From the outside, north, south, believe it or not, they're regional vocational training places, but you wouldn't know it from the outside. We have some incredible programs here, marine robotics, auto repair and maintenance, the people in the cosmetology can walk out of here, 16 different certifications in hair color, nails, the whole thing. The best data I've been able to find out so far, and I hope we find out more, says that 52% of our graduates go on to college, which says 48 do not. So I believe we have a responsibility to prepare that 48% as well as we prepare the 52% who may be college bound. So what can you do for me? Oh, in this, I think it's is it this building? Where do we have the machining? Is it south? I think it's south. We have a lab, maybe 20 machines sitting idle because we've been unable to recruit students. We had a teacher, we had to let them go. So the whole scenario around it. How can you reinvigorate what is, in my opinion, it's like the best kept secret about these schools, this high school, is the vocational opportunities we have. And how can you reinvigorate that program and put it on par with something like what they do down at the Lowell Tech Center?
You're 100% correct on the hidden piece of it. And I think going back to your question about the 3 states, in Massachusetts, as you said, like the Lowell Tech Center, they have separate high schools. And those kids, those high schools can choose the students that they take. And so they are taking the honor level students because those students are starting to see that the application piece, going back to competencies even, so applying my learning is where I'm having the most success, and colleges love that. And so, and in Vermont, I'm just going to tag on this a little bit, in Vermont, the school is separate, but it's attached. So it's a separate administration and everything like that, and it's attached. And we saw a very similar problem where kids weren't taking classes, and a lot of, of the traditional things were going unused. So I think it's finding out what are kids interested in, and not knowing exactly what machines are there or whatnot, but how do you, find out what kids are interested so you can offer those classes? How do you show those kids where the application piece to what they're learning is back to? But then also it's how do you bring industry into your building to show kids how that is a meaningful trade to go into? Because as you said, 48% are not going on. So the goal is that they're going to come out ready to go to a career. And so what is, as far as the machining, where would those jobs be for those kids as they come out, and what sector are they going to be able to go into, and what are those pays? And so you can show them, because you're going to have to recruit kids and actually lay out all of that stuff for them to see, and then start moving kids, trying to get kids in there and working that way. But I think bringing industry in so kids can see where maybe I wanted to be an engineer. Well, how does this machine, does it apply to what I want to know as engineering, right? Because as an engineer, it's good to know how the machine is being used, so as you start designing something, you understand what the person who's using the machine is doing, which I think is really important. I don't know if, when I was here before, it was the sophomore year was called the Exploratory Academy. I don't know if that's still, if anyone has that knowledge. And so one of the things we used to do there, the whole idea was we encourage students to take, quarter-length classes and go through a lot of those introductory classes so that they could, that's how you expose kids. If you just say, there's a machine shop, you guys want to take it, kids will not take that class.
Thank you. Ms. Hohensee?
Thank you. We have a lot of pilots in the district, and when, after a year, we usually like to get feedback as a board, and, is it working, is it not working? What we've run up against as board members is sometimes we only hear one side of an issue. The other side is afraid to speak up. So what would you do as a principal to encourage both sides to speak up so we as a board can make better decisions? So they're not afraid, and that's what they tell us, that they're afraid if they speak up that it would adversely affect them.
So when you first said pilots, I was actually thinking of actual pilots because of, Merrimack, Daniel Webster, and
I
and
pointed
also.
to George because he is a pilot. He was a
okay.
pilot.
So you're talking about new initiatives that are being
Yeah,
rolled out.
yeah.
And I think that one of the things that's so important is you have to see both sides of a picture. Because if you don't understand both sides, then you just have one opinion of what it is and that's what you're getting. One of the things is I ask teachers constantly for feedback. Is this working? Is this not working? If it's not working, tell me why it's not working. Don't come in and just complain, but offer solutions. And sometimes, because we roll out ideas and they sound great in an office, or they sound great when I'm at a conference or someone's at a conference, but where's that going to work? And so it's building, teacher level capacity for it. So we're going to try this. But if someone doesn't like something, is coming up with, let's present all those factors and weigh it out. And it's not, again, we're rolling out, whether you want to call it personalized learning or student-centered learning, but we're moving towards an idea of trying to develop competencies and getting people, students to connect better with their education. While it was an idea I had, it was getting teachers to get on board to want to do it. I will tell you that some of my teachers don't want to do it. They're not comfortable doing it. And I have told them, it's okay. It's okay to not want to do this. And it's okay to take a step back and watch what's happening and see what's going on. And I don't know everything that's going to happen. And some things may work and some things may not work. But that's my responsibility to be taking that and offering the board that feedback of what's working, what's not working. I don't have any problems if someone wants to speak up and speak their mind, because I can tell you the teachers in my building right now, I can tell you who's on board and who's not on board. I can tell you who feels one way or feels another way. And so I have those conversations on a continual basis with my teachers. So if one of them says, I feel like I need to go to the board, I don't even know if I'd even be at that place right now, because I feel that I've had those conversations that people feel comfortable with what we're doing and allowing themselves to kind of watch or be able to do, a more traditional piece. But I think the question was asked of me in the meet and greet about something very similar. And I think teachers need to be able to come and voice their concerns at any time. You can't, sequester people or make people feel fearful. And I'll be honest with you, when I first came to Nashua, there was that fear. So to hear that it's still there, and I can remember a teacher sitting down with me and saying, they can let you go. You're only a first-year teacher. They can let you go for saying these things, or for challenging someone. And my answer to him, frankly, was, if they can't let me speak my mind, then they don't want me here. Because I feel that a teacher, if I see something that's not working, I have to be able to bring that up and I have to say that. And so, as an administrator, you don't have eyes on everything, and teachers do, and they have to be able to feel comfortable to be able to come say something to you. And a lot of times, when we would talk with teachers and we would talk as an administrative staff, and we'd say, this teacher's coming up for tenure, and they'd say, that teacher, oh my God, they drive us nuts administratively. And we'd stop and you know, I owe a lot to Tim Kelly, who was the principal at South. He was the one who's, you know, kind of stood up to someone, and he said, what kind of a teacher do you think they are for students? And they said, you know, we all said they're the best teacher, you know, in that subject area. And he said, so can't we just deal with the complaining on our end? Because if they're good for students, that's what matters. And so if a teacher feels that something is not going right, they need to, if students are at the heart, then I don't have a problem with that.
Thank you.
Mr. Hollowell?
Yeah, Howard stole one of my questions, but you answered it pretty well. So you kicked around the personalized learning, individualized learning. So I've been on the board 10 years now, and we always talk about, you know, how do we motivate that student, and then we do things that we switch things. So, you know, we had like in the elementary school, we went to everyday math for a while because some students didn't learn well with the old math. So we thought, okay, here's the solution. We're just going to go to this new thing. Of course, there's some segment of kids that doesn't work for either. I think competencies tries to get at this a little bit because it in theory allows the student to kind of move at their own pace. Although, as you point out, if they reach some plateau at some point halfway through the year, it's not entirely clear that we can keep them entertained for another 6 months doing that work. So I guess could you describe to me, how do you get at that individualized learning when all the solutions seem to be applied to everyone equally?
So I think that, you know, one of the things that we try to do is, and I've tried to do when I was in Brattleboro, I oversaw the independent study program. And it's using that to connect with kids and finding ways to build a program around what they can do. So that student who maybe maybe they're burning through all of our curriculum. You know, we used to say, like, you know, we can't let these kids in middle school take algebra and geometry because we're not going to have any math for them at the other end, right? So what's wrong with kids taking college math classes? What's wrong with kids taking college, you know, English classes? And so those students who need to excel, we need to give them a pathway to excel. Those students who are struggling, we need to find ways to connect them into that machine shop and also find ways to make it relevant for them. And so I think it's so individualized that you've got to have those meetings with the kid. You got to sit down with them, and you've got to do the hard thing of mapping out a career path for them through school and saying, okay, maybe we can compromise. We can do an extended learning opportunity here with this course, but you're still going to need to get through this because that's the best way. And so by doing it, what you're doing is you know, I mean, the buzzword is a personalized learning plan, right? But you're sitting with a student and saying, okay, show me, you've got to get to this point. How do you think you can get to that point?
And what age are you doing that at?
We're starting in second grade, and it's a long journey. I'm going to be honest with you. So we're beginning those conversations at that level. We're moving to student-centered conferences now, where we're no longer, you know, so it's not the parent sitting down with the teacher only. We want in the spring that our students are leading the conference and being able to tell their parents, this is what I did and this is what I didn't do, and this is how I got here and this is how I didn't get here. It's also developing tools, and I really don't know because it was in-house for us in Brattleboro. We developed web pages for each kid where they had all of their personal learning plans, and they could attach and they could make a digital portfolio. So they had to show how they were meeting the standards. And that was driving kids to be involved. Sure, there were students who were very resistant to it because it's, you know, it's a new idea. And so you had to spoon feed those kids. You have to bring them along as they go.
So can I interject? So what do you do between elementary school and middle school and high school? So and it's a little bit from year to year, but how do you keep some sort of continuity?
So yeah, I have a luxury. I have a K-8 or pre-K-8, right? So I have that. And our kids go to Sanborn. And so we spend a lot of time talking with Sanborn administration and teachers of what they're doing. So when I came in last year, they were not having that conversation. They weren't having the conversation because Fremont contracts to send their kids to Sanborn, and they don't have a seat at the table. And so they're bitter about it. And so therefore, for some reason, we weren't having conversations. But at the center was our kids, right? And our kids have to find a way. So we started having conversations, and we're continuing to have the conversations of how do we connect the two so that it's seamless for our students as they move through. And so luckily, Sanborn's done a lot of this stuff already, and so we're looking at how do we dovetail in with them. In Brattleboro, what we did was we started working with, again, the lower grades, and we're going to develop one system. So we're not having 3 different systems as a kid moves through the different schools. And we had, in Brattleboro, we had schools that were K-8s, and then we had K-6s, and then we also had a 7-8 middle school. So we had to find ways to integrate that, and we worked with our whole, our whole tech department of how can we develop that. And sometimes, we always think the high school is going to push down and tell people what to do, but some of that stuff was being driven coming up, and so we were able to meet and have those meetings so that kids could move seamlessly through.
The risk of getting you in trouble with guidance counselors, what's your thought on the way the guidance system works? And I guess put a different way, what would you change about the way guidance works?
That is a heavy one. So first of all, they're school counselors. They're not, they like that is the term that I've been told to use. I think that school counselors need to work with their students for helping to navigate through a lot of what we just talked about. I think that we get kind of stuck in the we're not mental health counselors, but we are mental health counselors, and trying to find ways to help separate that out, because as a school counselor, their main focus is working with those academics, but it's also being an advocate for kids. And I think sometimes school counselors get kind of, we used to say in Brattleboro, and I don't know if Dr. Mosley will agree with this one, because I know he was in Brattleboro, we used to say, like counselors, that's where you go to retire. That counselors would go there to, once they got to a certain point.
He has, just for the record, he has no reaction on
I
his
know,
face
I saw
whatsoever.
that, so.
Very smart over there.
And I think, so it's bringing them along and having them work, having them be involved every day in what's going on. We worked with our school counseling staff to develop, like 6-week programs where they could work with students, a group of students, whether it's a grievance group or a bullying group or something like that. So we could use that as an alternative to out-of-school suspension, but also so we could do some, teaching of social emotional learning, which I think is something that, especially at a high school, is not necessarily explicitly taught by school counselors. It's taught by elementary school counselors, but it's not explicitly taught by high school counselors. So, getting them to have those conversations, getting them into classrooms. So counselors are always like, the kid comes to me. Counselors need to go to students and be in the classroom and see what the students are experiencing so that they can be those advocates.
And just to circle back around to Mr. Kaufman's question, how do you change the system such that going to college or going into the trades is equally important? It's what you think is going to drive the student rather than maybe what the norm is expected to be.
So I think, every kid should come out of school college and career ready, right? And so the idea there is understanding. When I was a special educator in Los Angeles, and I oversaw over 400 IEPs, and I had case managers, but I was kind of like the counselor, the disciplinarian, and the building coordinator for all of those. And so every student who came in, and we had a lot of kids would get what's called an opportunity transfer. So if you weren't such a great student in one school, there's 50 high schools in Los Angeles Unified, they could give you an opportunity transfer to another school. And so they would, the student would be sent to you, basically. And so I had kids coming in at all different times. And what I started back then was I literally sat with every single student who came into my building who had an IEP. I was also a football coach, so I did the same thing with my football players. But I said, what do you want to get out of here? What's your expectation? What do you want to do? And, kids would say, especially the football players, oh, I'm going to go play in the NFL. That's great. Here's the statistics of who's going. I'm your reality check. And so here's your reading level. Here's your writing level. Here's your math level. This is the level you need to be to do this task. And so therefore, if you want to get here, how vested are you to get there? And so we would have those conversations with kids. And so if a student says to me, look, I want to, I want to go build houses and I want to take over my dad's business or whatever it is, great. What do you need to get there? And not say that going that route is such a negative. Because we're always told, like, every kid's got to go to college. Every kid's got to go to college. I mean, at $50,000 a year, I mean, it's daunting for some kids. And so how can we help get them to that point that they understand what do they need to get there? And I think that is really our job in public education today.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, did we want to go into non-public? Do I have a motion?
I can't do it.
Move to go into non-public under RSA 91A 3(2)B, the hiring of a person as a public employee.
Second.
Discussion?
Roll.
All those in favor?
Roll call.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
Mrs. Ziem,
Yes.
Dr. Murataki,
Yes.
and myself, Mrs. Hohensee says yes. So we're in.
This time it's for real. But hopefully we won't be too long and you can come back in for the second. I would like to now reconvene the HR meeting. Do I have a motion for seal the minutes? For the minutes of that meeting?
Yeah, I move to seal the minutes of the non-public session under RSA 91A:3, 2C, matters which, if discussed in public, et cetera, et cetera.
90.
And this
it's
regard-
RSA 91A:33.
Oh, is
Thank
it
you.
3-3?
Did you get that, Mrs. Hohendy?
Oh, all right.
And I will
sorry.
second it.
And so we need a roll call on this.
Okay, Mrs. Ziem,
Yes.
Dr. Murataki?
Yes.
Mrs. Hohensee says yes.
Mr. Haas, thank you so very much for coming in and sharing your experiences with us, your time, and the trouble that we appreciate more than I can say. And I think Dr. Mosley will be getting back to you with the results of our conversation.
Thank you all. I wish you the luck in your search, and
Thank you.
Thank you very
thank
much.
you very much.
It was nice to meet you. God bless.
Can we get 5 minutes?
Oh, yes.
Get the next candidate.
I think you have another candidate who's been waiting because I think it was supposed to be at 8 o'clock. We started the other one. Yeah, so he's been waiting an hour.
An hour late, so just run.
Yeah, I'll be back.
If anybody else has to, I think that's a good idea. Just run. Please come down and have a seat, as Mrs. O'Gara pointed out. And that's the hot seat, right? Thank you for waiting. We're very sorry that we seem to be an hour late.
No problem.
You don't have to get up early tomorrow, do you?
I usually run at
First day
4:30.
of school, huh?
I run at 4 in the morning every day, so
4 o'clock in the morning? Wow.
I might sleep in a little bit. But
If you give me a minute, I would just like to wait for our whole
yeah, no problem.
team to get seated. Nate Burns is the second candidate who will be interviewed tonight for principal of Nashua High School North. Nate, I'd like to give you this opportunity to introduce yourself to the audience and to the committee.
Sure. Do you want me to just talk a little bit about myself and
Tell us all about yourself.
Sure. So Nate Burns, I started teaching here in the Nashua School District about 16 years ago, going into my 17th school year. Graduated from Boston University with a degree in biology. From there, I started working at Mass General Hospital doing research on cystic fibrosis. And while I was doing the research, I was asked to come back and talk at Elm Street. So I had a former teacher who contacted me, asked me to come in and speak to some of her students. It was a bio class, freshman, and said, sure, I'll take the opportunity. Went up there, met with the kids, had a blast just answering their questions and talking to them about what I was doing for research, and then kind of got hooked. I said, this is kind of cool. So from there, went back home, moved back into Boston, and was working, and it just, I was enjoying my time in the lab, but it just wasn't quite right. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go back to school and get a degree to teach and come back. And from there, ended up getting lucky, came back in, got a job right at Elm Street that first year, and started teaching 7th, 8th, and 9th grade science. And then I also had an English class for the PLUS program. It was an at-risk population of students over at Elm Street. So please let us succeed. And there were some pretty tough kids. I was like trial by fire that first year, first couple years actually. But I learned a lot, and worked with the kids and had some great experiences. I still talk to a couple of those kids that I see every once in a while, and they contact me through Facebook and let me know how it's going. Some of them have turned out to be pretty successful, which is nice to see, coming from that group of kids that we were working with. And then from there was an opening to teach biology at Nashua High School South. And this was just before the split, so I went up, took that position, and worked at South for a few years. And at the same time, I was coaching track and field and cross country, but I was coaching for North. It was right at the split at that time. And I said, I want to be in the same building as the kids that I'm coaching so I can meet them a little bit more, help them with their academics. And so I'm fortunate enough that a job opened up. Came over to North, worked with those kids, taught for a handful of years, and then the head teacher position opened up. So from there, I took the head teacher position for science, worked on curriculum rewriting. We did that for a few years. Worked on it with the department as far as improving assessments, developing assessments. Made some great gains in there. Worked on, did some observations on teachers, peer observations, moving in and out of the classrooms, and just talking about improving instruction as a group and as a team. And 2 years ago, there was an opening for an assistant principal. So put my hat in the ring, and I've been enjoying doing that the last couple of years. Track's kind of taken a little bit of a backseat to that, but and I certainly miss it, but I've been enjoying the job that I've been doing, working with teachers and working with students, and seeing some successes, and seeing some of the kids graduate last year was really a nice thing. And this job opened up, and I'm a lifelong Nashua guy, and said, it's eventually a goal of mine to be principal here, and I said I had to take the shot when I was there, so it kind of takes me to where I'm at now.
I guess the first question, the question that pops to my mind is when you were coming in, you were talking about running track at 4 o'clock in the morning. Do any of those students come out and run with you at 4 o'clock in the morning?
Run that early. We meet usually on Saturday and Sunday. I tell the kids I'll meet them at Lincoln Park, and I just run from my house and pop in through Lincoln. If there's any kids there, we just keep going. So a lot of them are a couple years that graduated, but there's a couple kids that show up that are on the team currently, and we go out and run some miles, and then either they drop me or we finish up the run together, and then go home from there. So kind of nice.
That running sounds daunting to me. Mr. Hollowell?
So as you know, we sort of have 2 high schools, right?
Right.
How do we get, excuse me for one. But we've struggled on the trade side I think we could have a lot more kids involved in that would lead to successes. Do you have any solutions to that? Do you have ideas as to how we get those kids engaged?
Yeah, I think we have some fabulous programs at both North and South. And I think the big thing is trying to hook them early. So we've got some connections over at the middle school now maybe that we can tap into. I know we've revamped that curriculum a bit. Maybe doing some transition meetings, coming from the high school down to the middle schools and meet with students throughout the year, especially as they're getting into 8th grade and have had some of those experiences, and let them know what things are about here. And then also, just talking and meeting with our kids, having them come in and tour some of the facilities that we have in CTE. I like the program that we have. I think it alternates between North and South each year, where we have the STEM girls group comes up, and they meet. My daughter last year heard about it. She's a 6th grader, or was a 6th grader last year, and she heard some of the 8th graders from the middle school moving up, and she wanted to do it. And unfortunately, she's got to wait a couple years before she gets there, but she's really excited and amped up about it. And all she talks about is, the tech program at Elm Street, and how good it is. And, she's hoping that she gets into the class this year. So I think it's one of those things we just have to kind of keep working vertically, and align our curriculum with the middle schools, and just continue to expose our kids to those things and get them involved. But there are, a lot of untapped resources. I'm really excited about our marine robotics program, and getting that stuff in here this year. I was talking to Bob Lancet this morning, and he's really excited about all the equipment that he has and getting that going. So it's gonna be fun to see that program grow.
And if I can follow up, so I've been on the board 10 years. We talk a lot about individualized learning, but I keep learning that most of our solutions are one-size-fits-all solutions. So how do we fight against that, A, and then B, looking at our guidance service or school counseling services, what would you change or what would you emphasize more or less?
So I think one of the things, as far as individualizing, I think the competency-based education is going to allow us to do that stuff. I think the thing that we stumble into it or run up against a roadblock sometimes is that when they're in a course, it's hard to get them into another spot because there's really nowhere else for them to go. And I think that's something that we've got to really still wrap our heads around and figure out how to do that. I don't really necessarily have an answer to that at this time, but I do think that's something we need to really revisit and look at and figure out, all right, the kid's competent in, October, but now the student has to sit in the classroom for another 4 months, not learning anything. I don't think that's really fair to that student. So to be able to do it, I'm not exactly sure how we get through that, and whether it's that they, we have our curriculum online and that we're able to go through it and work, if they're a freshman, if they can go through the sophomore curriculum in that course as well as sitting in the same room as some of the other students. Personally, I'd like to, if I were to get the position, work with some students on some ELOs and get them going and allow them to do stuff if they're interested in sciences, and use my background there to get them interested and invested in the school and, doing some research or whatever it is that they may want to do. And then guidance programs, again, just visiting and expanding. If we're talking, are you talking about expanding the opportunities for individualized learning
You tell
programs?
me. No, I'm saying, is there anything that you would change in that system?
I like what we made. We made a change last year, so that, we've got a structured alphabet that they're using for, 4 years. We've talked a little bit, I headed up a freshman transition team. And one of the concerns that we have is that, our freshmen coming in, they don't really understand or have a good grasp. So we've talked a little bit about how we could revamp and have a freshman dedicated guidance counselor. That may be the one thing that we're looking at, but we're trying to find data to support that need to change. So we've got a couple people that have been looking for that stuff, but at this point we haven't really found something either way benefiting, whether we have a true dedicated freshman counselors or, if we just still do the alpha. But I'm more than willing to look into those areas and work on it.
All right, thanks.
Mrs. Hohensee?
Thank you. I want to ask you the same question I asked the last candidate. We have a lot of pilot programs, and after a year or so, we get feedback. There's two sides of most issues, but the board, we usually hear one side because the other side's afraid to speak up. What would you do as a principal and a leader of the school to help either rectify this situation, or what do we tell those teachers that are afraid to speak up? Because as the board member, I appreciate hearing both sides of issues.
Yeah, I think I appreciate the same thing. What I would plan to do is have just a, open forum, have my office open in the mornings, afternoons, allow people to come in and talk to me about those things. If we have issues or various issues and they're not being addressed at either the school or building level or at the board level, I would hope that I'd represent, or I'd have a team that would represent the opinions of both sides and make sure that everybody's got an equal share, in expressing their opinions. Personally, if people don't know me, my office is open. I don't hold grudges against anybody or anything like that, and I feel like anybody can come and approach me and let me know, what their opinions are in a matter, and know that, whether we agree or not, that we're able to move forward in a positive way, as long as it's in the best interest of the students. And, I think that's what we have to keep in mind is any time we make a decision on something.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Van Twyver, he was first. Dr. I'm sorry, you're right, he was first. Dr. Mortaki.
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm not going to ask the same questions I asked the previous candidate. And the reason is you're an internal candidate. So you know or should know fully well what you're walking into and why you chose North to try to be the principal for. So here are two questions. So my first question is, thinking about North and what it does not have today, what do you hope to do in your first 2 years to achieve at North and make it a better place for the students that is not there today?
So I think, one of the biggest issues that we have right now is an issue with the culture and climate. So I think you're all very familiar with the survey that we had. And the culture was the number one priority that I think we need to address right away. To do that, we need to work with the teachers, work with the staff, and come up with a vision for the school. We're at a good spot right now with NEASC and the accreditation coming up, where we're going to have to revisit that and take a look at what our mission is and what do we want to accomplish here. We want our students to be successful, both in school, outside of school, and in their career endeavors. We need to take a look at, having consistency with discipline, making sure that they have opportunities either within their classrooms, outside of the classroom, connections to the real world. One of the big things I want to do is get back to, we were on the cutting edge a few years ago, I felt. Don Mead and I were talking the other day. We're at a conference, and we're looking and observing this conference. We said, we've done this. This was us a couple of years ago. And we've kind of been stalemated a little bit and haven't been the ones that are presenting or anything like that. And I'd like to go back to the ways that we were doing that. We work closely with South. I think that's one of the ways that we can do it, bounce ideas off one another, work together to make both North and South more successful. There's great ideas that are coming over there. There's great ideas that can come out of here. We have a lot of great teachers. I'd like to tap into them for their resources, have them develop PD plans and work with teachers, present material. I think there's a lot of things that we can do over those first few years. And by promoting that and promoting the positive nature of our school and what they can do, I think we can build that school culture and climate.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up?
Yes, of course.
So, second question. By the way, thank you. It was a good response. So the second question is this. Thinking about Nashua North and not counting culture and climate, which I think you gave a good response to, we have a saying down in the South, and pardon the slang, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if it is broken, you do fix it. So what do you believe, other than culture and climate, is broken at Nashua High North that you would like to fix in the next 2 years?
It's a really good question. I think one of the things that you always have to look at, regardless of whether something's broken or not, I think you can always look to make something better. And I think it comes down to working with the staff and working with students and determining what those things are that we need to attack. I'd like to really, it's not broken right now. We have students that have a lot of voice in what they're saying. They have a lot of input into into their classrooms, into the curriculum. But I don't think it's really there. I think the last couple of years we focused a lot on competencies from our student voice group a few years ago. I'd really like to see them now working towards improving the school as a whole and having more input and say into what's going on either in their classrooms, maybe working with teachers to develop curriculum, look at assessments. Are the assessments performance-based? Are they something that is going to be connected to the real world and what they're looking to do in the future? I'd love to see them get opportunities to express their opinions in the classroom and connect to the real world. So I think that's the biggest thing, is I'd love to just continue to do the work that we've done with our student voice group and build upon that and take that to the next level.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Van Twyver.
Thank you. Mr. Burns, I sit on the Ed Council committee, and I hear from them that there are teachers who are afraid to deal with students who are stronger and bigger. Mm-hmm. Also, as chair of the policy committee, we have discussed the question of cell phone use and how teachers can manage that. And I notice here that you have experience in classroom management, and I'd like you to just speak a little bit about how you would handle a problem with a teacher who is intimidated by students and how to manage the classroom
Sure. I think one of the biggest things is, we tap into the resources that we have here at Nashua North already. So if we have teachers that are struggling with classroom management, I would find different teachers that are already in the building that are having success with the same types of students and, suggest that they go and visit the classroom. So give them a professional day or a couple professional days to go into the classroom, observe, take notes as far as what's going on in the classroom, come back and try some of those things. But on the flip side, I'd like to have the teacher that they went and observed come back in and also, take a look and see, are they utilizing the tools properly? Can I give them a little bit more feedback and provide them with opportunities to kind of learn? So you need professional development opportunities for those teachers to really, gain control and understand how they can use the classroom management skills.
Do you feel that this is a major problem at North, and do you feel that the SRO is responsive when problems like these come up?
Definitely. I think, anytime the SRO is needed, he's stepped up and, arrives at any time we request him. We typically try not to have to have him involved in certain things, but if there's bullying issues or if there's issues where students are having, issues with one another, he certainly comes in and meets. We sit down and counsel the students either as an admin team or bring him in to talk about some things that, if you were to do this outside, what types of consequences you could have on that as well. I think there are certain teachers that probably have more issues with classroom management than others. And we as an admin team kind of try to identify them and work with them to develop their skills.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Mr. Kaufman? Mr. Kaufman?
Let's see, where is it? Okay, first thing I wanted to say was to thank you for your long-term service to the district, teacher, athletic coach, head teacher, and currently an assistant principal here at North. I have a couple of questions. They're all related. My first question, primary question, has to deal with your role as co-chair of the Joint North-South Competency Grading Committee.
Sure.
So the first part of this is, can you please explain your leadership role in this process?
Yeah, so basically myself and Ian Atwell, principal over at Elm Street, were the co-chairs, and we developed a team or advised a team. Basically it was, whoever was interested between North and South. We came together, had them sign up, and then we'd have regular meetings pretty much every month or sometimes bi-weekly, where Ian and I would run the meetings, determine what we were looking at as far as grading scales, what might be the competencies in different groups or how many competencies we thought would be appropriate. We utilized research. We had input from all different stakeholders in the building. We ended up bringing in the students as well into that process to make sure that they had voice in the grade scale, in how we were going to be grading within the classroom, looking at performance assessments, how we were going to assess the students, how we were going to report out. So some of the stuff we looked at was developing the report card. We had regular meetings with parents. We wanted to make sure that we were, getting input from all stakeholders, inside, outside of the school, making sure that we were presenting that to everybody so that it was kind of clear. We met many a time, too many probably to count, with the Board of Ed. We took their feedback and revised and adapted and continued to do that. We had a pilot that we ran the first year. From there, we took some more solicited input, made a couple more changes. We've continued to revise and, get it ready to go. And we're kind of currently at that stage now of, we need to take another look at it and see, is what we're doing correct, or do we need to make any other changes?
Okay, thank you. So it's a related follow-up question. What examples of evidence-based practice were reviewed during the committee process?
We took a look at, we had the fortunate we were part of a Smaller Learning Communities grant, and then also New England Network of Personalization and Performance grants that we had at the time. And we visited a lot of different schools. We did a lot of work with, developing assessments. We took a look at the assessments, had rubrics developed for it. Some departments decided to create rubrics that would cover all assignments, some rubrics that were specific to a single assignment. We took a look at those. We had teachers assess their students. They came back with those assessments. We calibrated the assessments to make sure that an A in my class was an A in another class. We took a look at differences in how we were grading, making sure that we were being accurate with those. If we weren't accurate, we'd have conversations between the teachers. Both North and South were involved in that process, and we kind of continued to just revise to make sure that everything was pretty much fair and equal between the schools and also between teachers within a building.
The last question about this would be, would you do anything differently now if you had to do it over again?
I think one of the things, we talked about it a little bit with some of the co-chairs and people that we worked with over the time, and maybe just taking a step back and maybe starting slower, or maybe starting, K to 12 and starting with the lower grades and building our way up. I think the state was putting a little bit of pressure on us to make sure that we were in a good spot. We were kind of rushing through the process potentially, or we didn't necessarily convey all of our information appropriately. So I'd like to maybe just take a step back and kind of build K to 12.
You said the state competency grading was not mandated by the state, so how did the state push
we
you
were supposed
forward?
to go, competency-based education was mandated at the time. And we wanted to make sure that we were doing it right. And to be able to be in a competency-based system, I think you need to use competency-based grading to appropriately grade your students. And, I think that's what we ended up moving through. And, for better or worse, we're where we're at now. And
One more on this is, how would you grade the implementation and rollout
I think
on a competency basis, right?
Yeah.
Right, 1 to 4, 4 being the highest.
I'd say maybe like a 2.5 at the start. And
Is that acceptable?
no, I think we're always constantly trying to revise it and fix it and make it better. One thing I'd like to see is, working with the vertical alignment and getting the middle schools on board and seeing if we can get a true K to 12 competency system for the district, I think would be an ideal situation in the long run.
Thank you very much.
Other questions? Mr.
Where do you think
Hollowell?
we're at now on the competency base? You said 2.5 when you
Yeah,
started.
we're probably closer to a 3. And I think, there's still some PD that needs to be used. I know we were talking about developing PLCs or using PLCs, especially for our new teachers, meeting to help them learn the competency-based system and move forward in that. But I think, we're still working towards that direction. But I think as a district, we've got some work to do still.
Mr. Farrington?
Yeah, I just don't want Nate to think I'm not interested. It's just that I waited too long and other people asked my questions, Nate. I think
All
you've
right, no
done
problem.
well.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none, we thank you very much
All right.
for
Thank you as well.
bearing with us once again,
No problem.
and hopefully tonight we'll come to some conclusion on all of this. Thank you again.
Sounds great. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Have a
Nate.
good night.
Mrs. Hohensee?
I move to recommend, is that appropriate with the hiring?
Yes, the last
Okay.
revised personnel.
Okay, move to recommend the revised personnel recommendations of August 28th, 2017.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion, questions, concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And then I think finally we will go into non-public to
I
discuss.
have another motion.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I move to recommend the hiring of Anna Vasconcala as the assistant principal at Lead Street Elementary School at a cost of $82,250 for the school year of 2017-18.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. And so now are we ready to go into
I-
non-public?
I have another motion.
Okay.
Move to recommend to the board that the members may attend, not participate in the upcoming CTE director interviews.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
For informational purposes, I will share with those present that I did speak with Dr. Mosley about this, and he felt that it was in order for us to follow the same process we had with the principals at North. Having said that, is there any further discussion, questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Next.
I move to go into non-public under
Mrs.
RSA.
Ziem, can I just interrupt? Does it make more sense for us to just go to, it's kind of a formality,
Go
the
ahead.
vote, that's just to go to the Board of Ed meeting rather than,
No. We've got to make a recommend.
Yeah, we can just go non-public in there.
we
Oh,
have to
not
make-
in the
we have to
committee,
make
but
a
at the special board
recommendation.
meeting. Do
I-
it once
We're all
I-
going to
instead of
be
twice.
here to have the discussion.
No.
If you'd like to do it that way and you want to change the
I'm not on the
motion-
committee, it's just a
No,
suggestion.
no,
If the
that's,
committee doesn't
it's all
wanna
right
do
with
it,
me.
that's
How do
fine.
you feel about that, board committee members?
I think that the committee makes a recommendation to the full board. We can have the discussion and then go into the full board meeting.
Usually we do that because the committee meets on a different day than the board meets.
Right. Well, we can have a joint discussion, and then we come out, the committee can make a vote, and then the full board can make a vote.
Can I ask a procedural thing?
Yes?
My understanding is the board, the committee usually makes a recommendation. In the case of these executive level principals and whatever, that a nomination is made by
Hey,
the.
Howard,
You can't hear. Howard, you need to put your mic on and speak into it. Thank you, Mr.
Sorry about
Cameron.
that, Jimmy. So, just procedurally, I'm just trying to understand. Typically, the committee receives a nomination list from the superintendent, and we vote on something that's been presented to us, just like the assistant principal at Ledge Street. That brought to us, we approve it, moves forward the board, whatever. But, so I guess now that Dr. Mosley's here, I'm just curious, based on the interviews that we've just had, is there a nomination or a recommendation coming from the superintendent?
We were going to go into non-public, I think, to discuss
Oh, so
that.
that's where we're going to discuss it? Okay,
And
thank you.
so I go back to the question that Mr. Hollowell had, and I would ask, my understanding is exactly
fine.
what
It
Mr.
doesn't
Hollowell
matter, Mrs.
said.
Ziem. I just was
If we
trying to
choose,
expedite the
but if we, in the spirit of expediting it, I would ask Dr. Moritaki how he feels about it.
I would be fine if it were discussed at a special board meeting.
At the full board meeting.
It's a
So,
special board meeting, but
yeah,
we're all
that-
here.
it is a special, excuse me, you had the correct terminology and I did not. So would you like to make a motion to that?
There's no motion to be made. Oh, all right.
Well, I was only saying that because it's on our agenda, but if everybody's copacetic with that, Mrs. Hohensee, are you?
It's not traditional, if that's the recommendation. It's just not traditional. I just thought we could go into non-public. The entire board could have a discussion. We can come out, make the traditional vote, and then immediately go to the special and have a traditional vote there, too.
Well, I would agree with Dr. Moritaki. It will save a step, and I see no reason not to. So, but if you feel otherwise, maybe we'll take a vote. Would you like to take a vote, or you just want to?
I don't think it'll save any time, but I'm happy with a vote if that's
Okay.
what you like.
Do I have a motion to adjourn then?
Move to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We are now out, so Mr. Farrington?
At 9:58.
How's everybody holding up? It's been 4 hours.
I'm ready to go home.
All right. I only asked,
Only been 3.5 for me, so.
okay.
I got here at 4:30.
All right then, so we'll call, oh, you don't have the book?
I'm finishing
have a
up.
book?
I'm
Oh,
done with
okay.
it now. It takes a second.
It's only been 2 hours for me.
That's all right, thank you.
No, I just didn't attend the non-meeting. I was in an airplane.
Reasonable.
So if we're going to press right on, you all set?
Yep, good.
Okay, so we'll call this special meeting of the Board of Education to order. It is 8:59, just changed. It's Monday, August 28th. We're in the North Boardroom, and we'll start with a roll call, please, Ms. Van Twyver.
Mrs. Oden, Dr. Murataki,
Here.
Ms. Van Twyver is here, Mr. Hallowell,
Yep.
Mr. Mosier, Mrs. Ziem,
Here.
Ms. O'Hensey,
Here.
Mr. Kaufman, Mr. Farrington.
Here.
We also have Dr. Mosley, Dr. McKinney, Mrs. Fitzpatrick,
Dana.
Mrs.
and
O'Gara.
Dana, other attendees.
Excuse me, Mrs. O'Gara, Miss O'Gara.
We're all getting tired.
Okay. We're all in our places.
You want a motion?
Sure.
I make a motion that we go into non-public under RSA 91A32B, the hiring of any person as a public employee.
I have a question.
Question?
We have a lot of other motions first to get those done with, or do we, when we come back, we're going to have a series of motions?
Yeah, we'll just do it
Okay.
all when we get back.
That's
So second, Ms. Hohensee?
Yes, that's the second.
Okay. Roll call, please, for non-public.
Was that 2C?
I believe.
Mrs.
I have it.
Yes.
Dr. Mirataki?
Here. Yes,
Mr. No?
yes.
Ms. Van Twyver votes yes. Mr. Hallowell?
Yes.
Mr. Mosier is not here. Mrs. Ziem?
Yes.
Mrs. Hohensee?
Yes?
Mr. Kaufman? Correct. Mr. Farrington?
Let the record show that was a yes by Mr. Kaufman, followed by Mr. Farrington with a yes. We are in non-public session.
9:00.
And then we have to wait.
Thank you. Okay, we're back. We need a motion to seal the minutes
So moved.
by Mrs. Ziem in accordance with RSA 91A33, seconded by
Second.
Mr. Hollowell. Roll call, please, Ms. Van Twyver.
Dr. Mirataki?
Yes,
Ms. Van Twyver votes yes. Mr. Hallowell?
Yes.
Mrs. Ziem?
Yes.
Mrs. Hohensee?
Yes?
Mr. Kaufman?
Sealing the minutes.
Sealing the minutes.
Yes.
Mr. Farrington?
Yes.
It's majority.
Majority, the minutes are sealed, and now we are out. And do you want to clean up your other business? Or do you want to go right straight to,
Let's go directly to this.
okay?
Sorry?
You want to make a
do you wanna do-
nomination,
Vice-
and then we'll vote?
I make the nomination to appoint Nate Burns, interim principal at Nashua North, for a period of 1 year.
Do we have a salary associated with that?
At $102,500.
Okay.
Move
So
to,
for purposes of the board, Mr. Hallwell.
move to approve Nate Burns as the interim principal at Nashua High School North for the 2017-18 school year in the, with an annual salary of $102,500 prorated.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Van Twyver. Mrs. Azim.
I will be voting against this motion, not because I have any dislike for Mr. Burns. He's a wonderful man, and he's given many years of dedicated service, professional service to our district. But I believe that 2 years' experience is insufficient. I believe that we need someone with more experience. And I want to give all you voters out there an opportunity to know that you might not want to vote for me in November. So if you actually think that Nate Burns is that wonderful, then you probably have to vote against me, and I hope that's
I don't
not the
think we
case.
should be campaigning here,
Campaign.
Mrs. Azim.
Well, it's all right. I won't be voting for Nate, and I hope everybody understands. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Kaufman.
I'm, in deference to Dr. Murataki, I'm happy to have the vote and then explain my vote.
Okay.
Roll call.
Roll call on the vote to approve the nomination of Nate Burns for the 17-18 school year. Please.
Dr. Mirataki?
yes.
Ms. Van Twyver votes yes. Mr. Hallowell?
Yes.
Mrs. Ziem?
No.
Ms. Hohensee?
No?
Mr. Kaufman?
No,
Mr. Farrington?
Yes. Motion passes on a 4-3 vote. Is that correct?
Yep.
Excellent.
may I explain my vote, please?
Mr. Kaufman.
So, I prepared this comment. While I'm grateful for Mr. Burns' long-term service to the district, I will be voting against his nomination for the following 7 reasons. Number 1, not enough experience in the current position. I am looking for 5 years minimum experience as a principal or assistant principal. Mr. Burns has been an assistant principal has been an assistant principal for only 2 years. Lack of committee recommendation. The committee was interesting. I identified that they thought he could grow into the position. I want an established leader that can come in on day zero and lead, which gets to the next point where the committee also identified, as did others, that he would need extensive mentoring. The principal I want to hire is able to give extensive mentoring to the people that work for them, not be needing it at the front end for themselves. Number 5, for my entire tenure on the board, we have had to continuously deal with numerous issues directly related to the implementation of competency grading, and quite frankly, in my personal opinion, none of it has been positive. Number 6, I consider competency grading to be the most divisive and stressful issue we have had to deal with, including the issues included X2 data entry, recovery and recovery inequality, grade compression, grade consistency, parent, teacher, and student survey disapproval, and misrepresentation of data to the board. This issue is so divisive that the teachers' union doesn't even take a position. And finally, number 7, grading must be fair, consistent, and well understood. In my opinion, it is not. In your as co-chair of the committee to bring this forward, he should have ensured that grading was well understood before it was implemented. Instead, the team that he was co-chair of set the district on its head, and we are still feeling the effects, and I expect this to continue for a while. That's why. I think that committee did an awful disservice to the school district as a whole by implementing something that was not ready, and we're still feeling the ill effects of it. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, you have a couple of, I'm sorry,
I've got
Mrs.
some
Hohensee?
motions.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Move to recommend hiring Anna Vasconcelos as assistant principal at Ledge Street Elementary School at a cost of $82,250 for the school year of 2017-2018.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Hollowell. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
I would
Ms.
move
Hohensee.
to accept the revised personnel recommendations for August 28th, 2017.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Hollowell. Is there any discussion on that subject? All those in favor of accepting the personnel recommendation say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. That's it for, is there one more?
Or move to recommend that the board members may attend, not participate in, the CTE director interviews that are coming up.
Second.
Seconded by
Roll
Mr. Kaufman. Is no discussion? Roll call, please. I'm sorry.
No discussion.
I was looking for discussion. If you want to discuss, you want to, okay,
Make a quick comment.
okay. Mrs. Ziem.
The previous, we changed the way we do it in that we allowed board members to observe this hiring process for the principalship here at Nashua High School North. And I was part of that because I'm HR and I was there as HR. Mrs. Hohensee attended. I saw nothing, she did nothing to impede the process, and it made her better informed. So from my view, anytime you make a board member better informed, you have improved their decision-making process. And so I think we should encourage that in every way possible. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I got a question on confirmation in a second.
Can I just say
Mr.
something?
Kaufman.
Yeah, I also attended that first session, and I felt it was instrumental in me seeing the pool of candidates and helping me reach my decision. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Well, let's see, we lost Dr. Murataki. Ms. Van Twyver votes yes. Mr. Hallowell?
No.
Mrs. Ziem?
Yes.
Ms. Hohensee?
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman?
Yes.
Mr. Farrington?
No. Motion passes 4-2. Any other business?
Move to adjourn.
It's a race.
Mr. Hollowell.
The board in unison, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. We're adjourned at 10:07.